0200 hours, June 17, 2026. U.S. Central Command intercept assets track multiple low-altitude objects crossing the Strait of Hormuz at wave height, inbound toward commercial shipping lanes. The objects are Iranian one-way attack drones. One day after Iran's foreign minister stands before cameras and announces the war is finished, that gap between a signed diplomatic framework and an active military operation defines the situation that defense analysts are tracking this morning. A 14-article Memorandum of Understanding, digitally signed on June 14th after being brokered in Islamabad, and every single night since that signing, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps sends attack drones into the most critical oil choke point on Earth. The specific question this forces is, why does a military organization continue offensive drone operations after its own government commits to a framework designed to end the war? The answer runs through the internal command structure of the IRGC, the physical geometry of a waterway 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point, the engineering arithmetic of a $15,000 drone threatening a $300 billion agreement, and a physical signing ceremony scheduled 2 days from now in Switzerland. Every night of drone launches before June 19th serves a calculated purpose. This is not confusion. This is institutional resistance with a budget and a timeline. The conflict that produced the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding began on February 28, 2026. U.S. and Israeli forces launched Operation Epic Fury, executing more than 1,000 airstrikes and cruise missile launches inside the first 24 hours of the campaign alone. That opening volume stripped Iran's layered air defense infrastructure, degraded coastal ballistic missile batteries, and placed IRGC naval assets under sustained operational pressure throughout the Persian Gulf. By April 13, 2026, U.S. Central Command imposed a maritime blockade on Iranian ports, repositioning naval assets to enforce economic isolation. Since that date, CENTCOM vessels redirect 139 compliant commercial ships away from restricted zones and disable 9 non-compliant vessels that refuse course correction. The blockade generates economic pressure precise enough to bring Iranian negotiators to a signed framework agreement inside 62 days. It works, at least on paper, which means the war that began with 1,500 strikes now rests on a 14-article document and a ceremony scheduled in a Swiss conference hall. The IRGC is not in that conference hall. On June 14, 2026, U.S. and Iranian negotiators digitally signed the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. The 14-article framework activates a 60-day negotiation window covering 3 primary domains: Iran's nuclear enrichment program, a tiered sanctions relief schedule, and a regional security architecture that addresses Iran's proxy networks across the Middle East. The economic centerpiece is a proposed $300 billion reconstruction fund designated for Iranian civilian and industrial infrastructure. Iran's pre-conflict gross domestic product sat below $370 billion. The reconstruction offer approaches the entire annual economic output of the country the war has been fought against. Few diplomatic frameworks in Iranian history carry a larger financial proposition. If you want to stay updated on critical global security events and defense analysis, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell now. The MOU does not declare the conflict over. This distinction carries operational weight. The Islamabad Agreement is a staged process, not a terminal treaty. Stage 2 negotiations hold a 60-day clock, and the physical signing ceremony, where both delegations formally execute the document before international witnesses, is scheduled for June 19th in Switzerland. Until that ceremony completes, the agreement's legal standing remains provisional. The IRGC's commanders understand precisely what provisional means. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi steps before cameras on June 15th and declares the successful end of the war on all regional fronts. Commercial shipping operators, remaining cautious despite that signal from an official government source, held off on repositioning tanker routes back toward the Persian Gulf. Markets adjust. Insurance premiums for Hormuz transit remained near historic highs. Then, U.S. defense officials confirm on June 16th that IRGC launch crews send attack drones toward commercial vessels every single night since the June 14th signing. Not occasionally, not in isolated incidents. Every night, timed to darkness, timed to the degraded optical tracking conditions that overwater nighttime operations create for surface defenders. Arachi's June 16th declaration does not merely complicate the MOU negotiations. It fractures the signal clarity that commercial shipping operators, insurance underwriters, and financial markets rely on to price Hormuz transit risk. When a foreign minister announces the war is over, and warships track inbound threats 6 hours later, every subsequent official statement from Tehran carries a discount applied by the people whose ships are actually in the strait. Before the MOU existed, the IRGC's operational posture in the strait already demonstrated the precision of its targeting doctrine. On June 9, 2026, an Iranian one-way attack drone detonates directly in front of a U.S. Army AH-64 Apache helicopter during a night patrol over the Strait of Hormuz. The detonation scatters debris across the Apache's forward sensor arc. The drone directly struck and penetrated the canopy. The burning infrared seeker from the drone passes through the fractured canopy and lands directly on the pilot's knee, burning through the flight suit material. The crew was forced to ditch the severely damaged aircraft in the sea and evacuate. The helicopter sank and was completely lost. That incident reveals something specific about IRGC drone employment doctrine. A proximity detonation directly in front of a two-crew attack helicopter at night over water requires prior intelligence on patrol routes, altitude preferences, and timing patterns. A $20,000 one-way drone does not need to destroy the Apache. It needs to degrade the crew's operational confidence in that patrol corridor. On June 8th, it nearly accomplishes both. The lessons CENTCOM extracts from that engagement directly shape the intercept architecture it runs every subsequent night through June 17th. 2 days before that Apache incident, on June 11, 2026, the operational situation produces a different threshold. U.S. naval forces load strike munitions and reposition aircraft on carrier flight decks, placing pre-authorized strike packages exactly 3 hours from launch against targets inside Iran. President Trump cancels those strike orders through a social media post announcing that negotiators reached a breakthrough. 3 hours. The distance between a renewed strategic bombing campaign and the diplomatic framework that becomes the Islamabad MOU measures 3 hours of clock time. That margin enters every subsequent IRGC calculation. Senior commanders watching American carriers execute pre-strike postures on June 11th receive a precise signal about American willingness to re-engage at scale. The 3-hour margin is not a figure of speech. It is a documented timeline of how close the U.S. came to launching strikes, which the IRGC must factor against every drone launch it authorizes after June 14th. Which means the operations on June 16th and June 17th proceed with full institutional awareness of exactly how close American strike packages came to executing less than 2 weeks earlier. The path to the June 14th signing does not move without friction. On June 12th, 2 days before the digital signature, President Trump reacts to leaked draft terms and posts a public warning to Tehran to get their act together and fast. The warning reaches Iranian officials through open channels before formal diplomatic communication, placing negotiators on both sides in a position where their working documents face public commentary before finalization. Foreign Minister Arachi responds on social media, "Good will begets goodwill. Enmity begets enmity." Two senior officials conducting parallel public and private negotiations through the same platforms their populations use to follow the war. This exchange does more than create awkward optics. It signals to hardline IRGC factions watching the process that the MOU framework has structural exposure, that draft terms can surface through social media before negotiators seal them, and that external disruption of the agreement remains possible. Hardline parliamentary factions use that signal to build opposition to the framework, even though the draft actually deferred decisions on dismantling nuclear enrichment sites to follow-on negotiations. Their opposition feeds directly into the operational orders that IRGC launch crews receive on the night of June 14th, the same night the ink dries on the agreement those factions reject. The IRGC's decision to launch drones after signing reflects organizational structure, not tactical confusion. IRGC Command maintains operational autonomy on tactical decisions, particularly when senior commanders assess that a diplomatic process directly threatens their institutional power base. The $300 billion reconstruction fund flows through channels that are not yet finalized, with critics warning it may fail to bypass IRGC-controlled economic networks. Sanctions relief under the MOU framework targets Iranian oil, petrochemical products, and associated banking and shipping services first. IRGC revenue streams built over decades through port facility management, import licensing authority, and construction contracting remain outside the MOU's compliance conditions, which focus on nuclear and maritime security instead. Every potential escalation after June 14th carries that institutional arithmetic. Disrupting commercial shipping raises the economic cost of the MOU's implementation pathway. Signaling operational autonomy demonstrates to parliamentary hardliners that the IRGC retains the capacity to resist. From the IRGC's internal frame, a $20,000 one-way attack drone, applying pressure to a $300 billion agreement, generates a cost-to-effect ratio that no conventional military procurement program matches. The math is, by any defense analysis standard, brutally efficient. The Strait of Hormuz narrows to 21 nautical miles at its tightest point. The navigable shipping lanes within that constrained width sit even closer to the Iranian coastline, placing commercial tankers inside corridors where the distance from IRGC coastal launch positions measures in single-digit nautical miles. A one-way attack drone launched from an Iranian coastal position reaches mid-channel in under 4 minutes at standard cruise speeds. That transit time compresses the engagement window available to intercept systems. CENTCOM assets must detect, classify, and execute intercept launches inside a timeline that accounts for sensor confirmation latency, fire control sequencing, and the intercept missile's own time of flight. IRGC launch operators understand this geometry and design their operational patterns around it. Simultaneous launches from dispersed coastal positions divide intercept asset attention across multiple threat vectors. Wave height flight profiles, running below the radar horizon of surface ships, reduce detection range to distances that tighten engagement windows further. The combination of saturation tactics and low-altitude ingress makes the Strait one of the most operationally demanding intercept environments that CENTCOM forces work in anywhere on Earth under active threat conditions on the night of June 17th. U.S. Central Command's night intercept operations do not simply assign patrol aircraft and wait for radar returns. They build a layered detection architecture across that 21 nautical mile corridor by combining shipborne radar with airborne early warning platforms and fixed surveillance assets, extending detection coverage below the natural sensor horizon. When an IRGC drone launches from a coastal position, the first detection typically arrives from airborne sensors rather than surface ships, buying additional seconds in the engagement timeline. That detection triggers an intercept sequence that must execute faster than the threat's transit time from coast to shipping lane. CENTCOM confirms on June 13th that all incoming Iranian drones in overnight operations receive intercepts before reaching commercial shipping lanes. 0 penetrations. But maintaining that record carries a financial cost structure that defense analysts track with attention. Intercept missiles cost orders of magnitude more than the $20,000 to $50,000 drones they eliminate, which generates an attrition equation that IRGC planners built into their operational model when designing their drone campaign. The asymmetry is deliberate, and it is documented. The IRGC's post-MOU operations extend beyond targeting military patrol assets. Under what IRGC commanders frame as a unilateral traffic separation scheme, commercial tankers that do not submit to Iranian transit fee collection face direct targeting. 2 commercial tankers, the Prima and the Louis P, come under active threat during these operations. Their operators face a choice that no commercial maritime operator should face under an active peace framework: pay fees to a military force whose government is linked to a provisional framework, or risk drone strikes on open water. Under international maritime law, the Strait of Hormuz falls within the territorial jurisdiction of both Iran and Oman. No single state holds unilateral transit authority. Foreign Minister Arakchi's June 5th declaration specifically states that Iran will jointly manage the strait with Oman. The IRGC's proposed fee enforcement scheme is paused, following reports the day before that Iran would suspend transit fees for 60 days. That visible contradiction between Iran's diplomatic messaging and its military command is not an accident. It documents the fracture between 2 power centers inside Iran, one sitting at a negotiating table and one standing at a drone launch site. Financial markets monitoring Strait of Hormuz escalation do not wait for formal damage assessments. On the night of June 16th, as IRGC drones cross toward shipping lanes and CENTCOM intercept operations begin, Bitcoin fluctuates in the $65,000 range. That drop triggers approximately $1 billion in cryptocurrency liquidations. Institutional traders now use digital asset markets as a rapid response escalation hedge. Cryptocurrency markets operate continuously without the session structure of traditional exchanges, which means geopolitical escalation events at 0200 hours produce financial signals that reach analysts before any formal reporting cycle completes. A $1 billion liquidation event generated by a single night of IRGC drone operations represents a form of economic disruption that the Islamabad MOU's architects did not fully account for. The agreement's reconstruction fund requires stable financial conditions to build the political support its 60-day negotiation clock demands. Overnight drone escalations that trigger crypto liquidations, shift tanker insurance premiums, and redirect commercial shipping routes each impose a cost on that stability. Compounded across multiple nights, they add up to a material threat to the MOU's economic viability before the first formal negotiation session convenes. The physical signing ceremony for the Islamabad MOU sits 2 days from now, scheduled for June 19, 2026 in Switzerland. 2 delegations will sit at a table and formally execute a document that, if it holds, ends the conflict that began on February 28th and carries a $300 billion pathway to reconstruction. The IRGC's calculation for the period between June 14th and June 19th is direct. Every night of drone operations builds pressure before the ceremony. A tanker struck before June 19th creates a diplomatic crisis that hardline factions exploit to demand concessions, delay the signing, or discredit the entire MOU process. The goal is not to win the war. The goal is to alter the terms on which the war ends. CENTCOM holds the operational counterposition. 0 penetrations through June 17th preserves the diplomatic conditions under which June 19th remains viable. One successful drone strike against a commercial tanker one burning hull, one incident that reaches international news networks before diplomats board planes to Switzerland, resets the political conditions that make the ceremony possible. The 60-day window is the operational objective for both sides, measured in very different ways. The pattern Navy tactical analysts track across June 14th through June 17th follows an institutional logic that predates the Islamabad MOU and does not automatically dissolve when two delegations sign a document on June 19th. The IRGC operates as a force with independent revenue interests, autonomous tactical authority, and its own assessment of what the $300 billion reconstruction offer represents, not an opportunity. A structural threat to the organizational networks that generate IRGC institutional power. A drone launched at a commercial tanker in the Strait of Hormuz on the night of June 16th is not a military miscalculation. It is a deliberate signal from one power center inside Iran to another. The Guard Corps retains the capacity to determine the conditions under which any peace holds. CENTCOM's documented response intercepts every inbound drone before it reaches the shipping lanes through June 17th. That operational record holds through tonight. The question the next 48 hours answer is whether the IRGC's institutional resistance sustains its post-MOU posture through Friday, or whether the threshold that nearly triggered renewed strikes on June 11th reactivates before both delegations arrive in Switzerland. The Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding offers Iran $300 billion and a documented exit from a war it did not win, conducted with $20,000 drones over a 21 nautical mile corridor at 0200 hours. Both negotiations proceed simultaneously. Until June 19th, the Strait is where those two conversations intersect, tracked on radar, measured in intercept timelines, and priced into a crypto market that moves faster than any diplomatic